In this video, we're going to talk more about the practical aspects of how we overcome these selves and free ourselves so we can actually fulfill our reason for coming to Earth. But there's a couple of things I think we should talk about first. And the first one is this concept that we have been abandoned by God. That we came to this planet, we had these horrific experiences here, and then we felt we were abandoned. We had no support, we had no help from above, and we have a sense from a natural planet that we should have help from above. And now here we are on Earth where there's such terrible things happening and we feel we're cut off from this help. So how do we deal with this? Well, again, this was a process that took me some time to overcome these kind of attitudes that I had picked up over many lifetimes. But what really helped me was to understand that, first of all, that there are fallen beings, that there's a special category of beings who are deliberately and consciously working against the purpose of life, the purpose of creation and the spiritual path. So they will do everything they can to sabotage our spiritual growth. And as part of this effort, they have created this, several false images of God. And you can take, as a typical example that I was exposed to, and many people I know were exposed to, is the Old Testament God, the angry God up there in the sky, who is a very black and white being, because either you obey him totally or you go to hell and suffer for all eternity. There's not really a lot of room for individual expression there. And we, of course, as avatars, we sense there's something wrong with this, because we have a sense, even if we don't have the terminology, we have a sense that we're co-creators. And there is room for free will, and there is room for individual expression. And that's what we are used to from a natural planet, and we carry that with us. So for an avatar to submit to one of these traditional religions where you just have to obey the outer religion and its priesthood, it really doesn't compute for us. And it's very, very difficult for us to fit ourselves into a system like the Catholic Church or most Christian churches, especially the fundamentalist churches. We just can't squeeze ourselves into that little box there. But when we go a little bit deeper, we can realize that what the fallen beings have been trying to do by creating this image of God is that they have actually tried to prevent all people from connecting to the true spiritual teachers that are here. And in order to really grasp this, it's very, very helpful to have the teachings that I have given in my series about how the world works, especially the first one, how the world was created. If you look at that video, you get the overall picture that I think can be very helpful for you, because it gives you that broad perspective. And one of the things that you realize from this is that there is something called ascended spheres and unascended spheres. In other words, the world was created as a series of spheres. And the previous spheres have all ascended. We are living in the latest sphere, which is unascended. And the reason why it's important to understand this is that it's really the only way we can understand how a planet like Earth can exist and how the things that are happening on Earth can be taking place. How can this be allowed? So, because the sphere is unascended, free will is still being allowed to go into both directions it can go in. And the one direction we can use our free will is that we can see ourselves as connected beings. In other words, we're part of a whole. And what we do to other people will affect ourselves, because it affects the whole and we are part of that whole. But of course, as avatars, we also have this sense we are connected to something beyond the material world, our higher selves and our spiritual teachers. And so when we have this idea, when we see ourselves as connected beings, there are certain things we don't do with our free will. We just don't harm other people. But the other way we can exercise free will is we can see ourselves as separate beings. And I've talked about that in several of my videos, how we go into this illusion of separation, where we're separate beings. And we use the duality consciousness to justify why we do what we do as separate beings. And as I've said, in the duality consciousness, anything can be justified. So, the reality on Earth is that Earth is an unnatural planet because the majority of the people on Earth have chosen to go into the consciousness of separation. And therefore they are exercising their free will as separate beings. They were partly misled by the fallen beings, but they had already started going into that before the fallen beings came here, as I've explained. And so what we realize from this is that on a natural planet, all of the beings on these natural planets, they have made the choice not to exercise their free will as separate beings, but as connected beings. And that's why they're natural planets. And that's why we don't have the kind of violence and warfare and selfishness that you see on Earth. But Earth is one of the few unnatural planets, and because our sphere is unascended, unnatural planets are allowed to exist and outplay whatever the inhabitants of those planets need to outplay before they've had enough of separation and the inevitable conflict that it creates. So when we understand this dynamic, we can first of all understand that God, the creator, the ultimate creative being in our world of form, is not involved with Earth. Because the creator is not involved with an unascended sphere. The creator basically says, this sphere is unascended, I'm not going to look at what happens there. Because whatever God puts its attention upon, if the creator put its attention on Earth, for example, the creator's consciousness is so intense, so powerful, it would instantly wipe out the planet. Because all of the things that are happening here that are not based on a sense of oneness, they couldn't exist if the creator looked at it. So the planet would just evaporate like that. And of course, this is not what the creator wants, because the creator wants to give free will and a chance to outplay itself. So the creator isn't looking. So what the fallen beings have done, first of all, is they have created this concept that there is a God, an ultimate God. And that this God is involved with human beings and is looking at human beings and is judging us and possibly sending us to hell if we don't obey his commands. So they have created this image of this very, very remote God, and there's nothing in between. Well, there's a few angels flying around up there, but basically there's God and us, and there's a huge gap, a huge gorge, a huge chasm between us and God. And the effect is, of course, that people can't connect to God. I mean, how do you connect to God? It's so far up there. Well, first of all, you can't connect to God, it doesn't exist, right? And the Old Testament God, the angry being in the sky, doesn't exist, except, as I've said, as a temporary existence in the collective consciousness. So, this is one thing. But the other thing we can understand based on this is that the fallen beings, we can say, why have they created this false image of God? Well, because they know that it's very difficult to eradicate all people's longing for God, for some ultimate being. So in order to divert that longing, they have created this false God. Then, of course, in recent centuries, they have started creating the religions of Marxism and scientific materialism that deny the existence of a God. And so they're trying to do both. They're trying to appeal to both. And why have they done this? Well, because after thousands of years with a false God, many, many people are starting to not believe in that God. And so they have to direct their attention into something else, some other philosophy. And why are people not believing in God? Because what is this God portrayed as? It's the wish-fulfilling God. And you can look at many other religions, the Greek religion, the Roman religion, the Hindu religion. They have a multiplicity of gods, but they are all gods for specific areas. So in other words, again, if if you make sacrifices to a certain God, this God is going to do a personal favor for you. So again, a version of the wish-fulfilling God. So when people over many lifetimes have lived in a religious environment where they have this wish-fulfilling God, they eventually get to a point where they realize, but it doesn't work. I can make sacrifices, I can burn incense, I can light candles, but God doesn't show up and do what I want. So people start, getting tired of this. And so what is the real goal of the fallen beings for this? First of all, it's of course to direct people away from the real God, but since we can't contact the real God on an unnatural planet, what the masters want is to direct our attention away so we don't connect to the real spiritual teachers that we have. And these spiritual teachers are what I call the ascended masters. They have over time been called other things, but in this day and age, they have started giving more direct teachings where they present themselves as ascended masters. And that's the name they have chosen, so that's of course the name I'm using. And as I explain in my How the World Works videos, when the fallen beings came to this planet, their primary goal was to make sure that nobody on Earth would recognize the existence of ascended masters. And I explain why ever since they fell, when they were confronted by the ascended masters, they have done everything they can to deny in their own minds the existence of ascended masters. So this is their primary modus operandi. They are denying the existence of ascended masters, and they want all people on the planets they are on to do the same. So they've done everything they can to eradicate the whole idea that there are ascended masters who are here with us and who are willing to assist us in a variety of ways. So in other words, you can say, are the ascended masters the wish-fulfilling gods? No, they're not, because the ascended masters are not here to fulfill our wishes, at least in terms of getting physical advantages. They are here to help us resolve our psychology so we can raise our consciousness. That's the primary function of the ascended masters, is to help us walk that spiritual path. And so what the fallen beings have done is to really try to completely eradicate the idea that there's a spiritual path. That's why you have these religions that promise you that if you follow the religion, you're going to be saved in the end. But they don't present you with a step-by-step path that only relates to what you do about your consciousness. There's always something outer. You have to follow the outer religion, believe in its doctrines, participate in its rituals, light candles, do this, do that. Then you're going to be saved. But the real salvation is, of course, that you raise your consciousness beyond the level of separation and duality and come into oneness with your higher self. That's the only salvation there is. And that, of course, is what the fallen beings want to hide. They want to eradicate that entire concept, so nobody becomes aware of the path and can follow it. Okay. What's that got to do with us as avatars in the sense of being abandoned? Well, you cannot be an avatar who came to Earth unless you were working with the ascended masters before you came here. It's simply impossible. The ascended masters, as I've explained, they exist in the spiritual realm, which is actually the previous spheres that ascended. There are different levels of it because there are 6 spiritual spheres, but the ascended masters that are working with Earth, they are existing in that 6th sphere that ascended before our sphere was created. So they are the beings who are assigned by the entire cosmic hierarchy to work with us here on Earth, or they have chosen to do this. And if you're coming from a natural planet, you're also used to working with ascended masters on a natural planet. Not all beings on natural planets do this as of yet, but as you reach higher and higher levels of awareness on a natural planet, you naturally start working with the ascended masters because they are the spiritual beings who are right above our sphere and are working with our sphere. They, for that matter, created our sphere. So naturally, when you see yourself as a co-creator, who are you co-creating with? The ascended masters. So you had an intimate relationship with one or several ascended masters, and they were working with you as you came to Earth. And so then you make the choice based on, working with the ascended masters. You're going to descend and take embodiment on earth. And then, as explained in the previous video, if you come down here, we are shocked by the density of matter. And of course, then the fallen beings abuse us, the human beings ignore us. And this is such a shock for us that we lose our sense of connection to the ascended masters. And I struggled with this for a long time. I mean, really struggled with it. And it was actually made worse by my second spiritual movement, which had teachings from the ascended masters, very profound teachings. But it also had a certain organizational culture that was very much tied into what you see in the Judeo-Christian tradition, where you have this concept of original sin. We are sinners. We have sinned against God. We were even born into sin, as the Catholics say, because of what Adam and Eve did back there in the past. I don't know about you, but I don't think I knew Adam and Eve, and I don't think I liked them. So it never made sense to me that God would hold me accountable for what somebody else did, because I always had this sense that I'm willing to take responsibility for myself. But that also means that I am not responsible for the choices of other people, and God wouldn't hold me, or rather the Ascended Masters wouldn't hold me responsible for other people's choices. But anyway, the culture in my second spiritual movement, even though it talked about Ascended Masters, was that at some point in the past, we had left the guru. We had left the teacher. We had walked away from the Ascended Masters, and this was a big flaw. And we had to overcome this, and we had to feel guilty for it, and so forth and so on. And there was a certain amount of fear and guilt in the collective. I'm not saying this came from the Ascended Masters, but it was there in the collective culture of the organization. And I struggled with for probably 20 years to overcome this. And it really didn't fully click for me until I received these teachings on the avatars, because as I said in my last video, we had to come to Earth in order to demonstrate to the inhabitants of the Earth that it's possible to overcome all of the consciousness on Earth and walk a spiritual path that raises us above it. So that mean we had to descend into separation, just as most of the inhabitants of the Earth had done. So it wasn't that we deliberately and maliciously chose to walk away from the Guru or the Ascended Masters. It was just part of our task here, of our assignment here, was to descend into separation and then climb our way back up so we can demonstrate to the inhabitants of the Earth that this can be done on a dense planet like Earth, with all of the stuff that's going on, all of the mechanisms that are trying to prevent this path. We can still discover the path, walk it, and we can demonstrate this so that other people can see that, well, if this person who seems to be just like me can do it, then I can do it as well. What one has done, all can do. So the reality here is, we didn't choose to walk away from the Ascended Masters. And the Ascended Masters did not abandon us. It was just the mechanics of coming to Earth in this extremely dense planet where the majority of the people are in such a low state of consciousness. We just had to go down and demonstrate how to climb our way up. And if we didn't go down, we couldn't really demonstrate the way up, could we? So when you realize this, begin to contemplate this, you can perhaps look at whether you have been affected by this guilt trip that has been put upon people by the fallen beings. And then you can over time start working with this and realize that the Ascended Masters didn't abandon you, you didn't abandon them, which means what? Well, it means the Ascended Masters are right here. They are right here with you. And you can reconnect to them, maybe not instantly because you can have all of these separate selves, but you can certainly go through a process of reconnecting to the Masters. Now, why would you want to do this? Because what is the purpose of life? It is to be a co-creator. what have I said about free will. We can use free will as separate beings, or we can use free will as connected beings. When we are in separation, we are walking further and further away from connectedness. We are walking deeper and deeper into separation, which I've explained in some of my other videos, how the duality consciousness causes us, react to one thing, and then we react to another thing, and then a third thing, and we just keep going deeper and deeper, digging a deeper and deeper hole for ourselves, which is what most people on earth have done. So when we go back into connectedness and begin to see ourselves as co-creators, again, who are we co-creators with? Well, the ascended masters. They are the ones right above us in hierarchy. And so it's natural as part of walking the spiritual path that we expand our sense of connection with our higher selves and with the ascended masters. This is just how the path works. I know very well that there are many, many spiritual movements out there that talk about a path. They don't talk about ascended masters. But I've explained why that is, because they have been affected by this blackout that the fallen beings have created on earth, denying the existence of ascended masters. But the reality is that the ascended masters are there. They are the ones who are right above us in the spiritual hierarchy. And if we want to climb higher, they're the ones to work with. I mean, it's like saying, it's like saying that you're in a deep gorge and there is a ladder. And in order to get out of the ladder, out of the gorge, out of the hole, the natural thing is to walk the ladder. But somehow you have stepped back and said, no, I'm going to deny that the ladder exists, and I'm going to look for a way so I can just float out of the hole against the laws of nature. So the ascended master is not really the laws of nature, it's the spiritual laws. And there's a spiritual law, and it is that you work with those above you. Why? Because you have gone into duality and separation, and you need to shed all of these illusions that come from this. How do you shed the illusions of duality? As I've tried to explain in some of my videos, how the mind becomes a closed system, a self-reinforcing, self-validating system. You can't escape duality by using the dualistic mind. So you need to do what? You need to connect to a mind that's beyond duality, that is the Christ mind. But who represents the Christ mind for earth? The ascended masters. Why? Because they have walked the path before us. They have gone through all of what we are going through, and they are the natural teachers for us to show us how we can do the same. I mean, it'd be foolish. It'll be a kind of pride to think we could do it without the ascended masters. And I realized this, back in 1984, 85, when I first really heard about ascended masters. I realized that the value of ascended masters is they are above any of the illusions and manipulation on earth. And that's why they can be my frame of reference for escaping those illusions myself. I mean, why not take advantage of what's there? I understand that there can be a certain psychology that avatars can have, and I had it myself for a while. For example, in my second spiritual movement, the leader of that movement had the title of guru. And there was a certain culture that there were certain of the people in the organization that were her personal chelas. And she would then take on the karma of those students. And personally, I never saw myself in that role because I didn't want somebody to take on my karma. It is my karma. I created it. I want to uncreate it. So, in a sense, I can see that in my psychology, I had this sense that, okay, I've lost contact with the masters and I've gone into duality, but I want to fix the problem before I go back to the masters. In other words, I wanted to clear up all the dualistic illusions, overcome all the dualistic illusions before I went back to the master, so I could say to the master, well, see, I did leave you, but I've cleaned up my act and here I am. And I realized after struggling with this for some time, this was it was just a complete misunderstanding. I mean, it was, I won't necessarily say it was so much of a pride, but it was an overinflated sense of responsibility. You know, that I am ultimately responsible for the choices I made, so I need to fix those choices. And I realized how silly it was. I mean, it would take me, even if it could be done, it would take me much longer. And it actually couldn't be done because in order to overcome a dualistic illusion, you need to have a reference. It's like saying you've lived your whole life in a dark mine and you're longing for the light. But you think that by rolling around in the darkness and resolving whatever makes up the darkness, one day the light will appear. But what you really need to do is to go to the wall in the mine and find a hole that lets the light in. Because once you have seen the light, you have a different frame of reference to evaluate the darkness. If you don't have that frame of reference, how are you going to know that there's an alternative to the darkness? So it was the same with me. I realized, no, it's completely silly to think I can resolve all of these illusions on my own. I need the Ascended Masters as my frame of reference. I can make so much faster progress. In fact, I can't make progress without having that frame of reference. So I realized this, and ever since then I have been doing everything I can to work with the Ascended Masters to help me see what I need to see. And I mean, it's been a tremendous process, tremendously rewarding process. It's been going on now for over 40 years or so. And I become, of course, have more and more contact with the Masters, more and more open, so that it doesn't take as long anymore. When I ask them to show me something, it happens much more quickly than it did 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. So the reason why I'm saying this is that, again, if you are an avatar, if you came to Earth, you were working with the Ascended Masters before you came to Earth. Then you had to descend into losing that contact. But in order to fulfill your reason for coming to Earth, fulfill your divine plan, in order to ascend from Earth, in order to walk the spiritual path, the natural step is to regain your contact with the Ascended Masters. It's just simply the natural step. And so why is this important? Well, it's important because, as I explained, we have created, in reaction to what we experienced on Earth, we created these subconscious selves. And I've explained in some of my other videos, both in the breakthrough videos and in the How the World Works videos, that a self is ultimately based on a decision we made. But we made that decision because we had a limited perspective. We were in a lower state of consciousness. So in other words, you are at the 48th level of consciousness on a planet like Earth. You are attacked viciously by the fallen beings. And based on this, you are making a decision at the 48th level, the perspective you have at the 48th level. And that decision brings you to the 47th level, into separation. And now you are again reacting and you go down further. Now, most avatars haven't gone to the lowest level of consciousness possible on Earth, but we have gone some steps down below the 48th level. And it caused at least some of us to fight the fallen beings. We started fighting the fallen beings. And so when we do this, we are, as I said, we are making a decision. And the decision becomes like a matrix, a pattern that's set up in the subconscious mind, in the emotional mind, the mental mind, and the identity mind. In other words, we have a certain decision that it's unavoidable or okay to be angry with the fallen beings, for example, because they violated us. We have certain beliefs about what it would take to overcome this threat of the fallen beings. And we even develop a certain sense of identity, seeing ourselves as separate beings who may be either in opposition to the fallen beings or who have to try to stay away from them, stay up below their radar. And but this is one thing. There's a certain decision that's made. So the other aspect of this is that everything we do is done with energy. We are receiving a stream of energy from our I am presences flowing into our identity body, mental body, emotional body, and the physical. And when we go into separation, this energy is qualified with a fear-based vibration. And therefore, it can't ascend back up to the I Am Presence and get multiplied. But instead, it accumulates in our four lower bodies, especially emotional, mental, and identity bodies, but even the physical. So as the energy accumulates, it has more and more of a pull on our conscious you. So in other words, what the Masters are saying is that we have the conscious you, and it is always pure awareness. Whatever separate selves we create, we don't become the separate selves. The conscious you is still pure awareness. But the more energy is accumulated in these subconscious selves, the more it pulls the conscious you into going into the self. And now it's looking at the world and looking at itself from inside the self, through the perception filter of the self. And at any moment, the conscious you can step outside the self and see that, oh, I'm not that self. But the more energy that pulls on us, the more difficult it is. That's why you will see some people that have only been able to step outside their normal sense of self when they were in some extreme situation. For example, when their life was in danger. You can see near-death experiences where they describe, for example, that as their body is dying or close to dying, it's like they step outside not only the body, but their normal sense of self, and all of a sudden they see a totally different perspective. I remember a number of years ago reading a book about people who had been in extreme situations where, for example, I remember one lady was being attacked by a rapist, and all of a sudden she just stepped outside of her normal fear-based reaction, became totally calm and peaceful inside, and her reaction was so unexpected that the rapist couldn't go through with it. And there are other stories about this, like this, where people have had a totally different reaction than normal. And this just shows you that for most people, the conscious you can't step outside of the normal sense of self unless there's some extreme situation. But the fact that it can happen means it's always possible. So what we want to do as avatars is, of course, we want to get to a point where the conscious you is not identified with these separate selves, because we have had enough experiences of going outside the selves and experiencing a higher perspective. I Am Presence, ascended teachers, and therefore we're not identified with it. No, I had a fairly long period of time where I started having more and more of these, what you might call mystical or intuitive experiences, or non-dual experiences. But I still, after the experience, would go back into my normal sense of self and state of awareness. But even though I went back into the normal sense of self, I just wasn't as identified with it. I never really, after I had started having more of these experiences, there just came that point where I couldn't really identify myself with my normal sense of self. And therefore it became much easier for me to step outside of it. It became easier for me to see that, oh, now you're reacting again. You're reacting like you did before. I don't want to do that. Let me just stop. And I became able to stop myself in many situations from reacting. Not all situations for a long time, but still it got better and better over time. So again, the question is, here we are, here you are. You've come across this teaching. Most likely you have been on the spiritual path for quite some time. And most likely you have already done what I'm talking about. You have either found a spiritual technique for dissolving energy in the emotional, mental, identity realms, and you have found some spiritual teaching that has helped you overcome some of your subconscious selves, because you've come to see the illusion and see that it limits you. So what I'm talking about here is not necessarily something that's completely alien to you. It's more a matter of becoming aware of the process that you've already gone through. And then you can, as you become more aware of it, you can of course use it more consciously. And that's where, again, the Ascended Masters can be a tremendous help. They have given a number of teachings. I mean, a huge number of teachings through me over these past 20 years. You can find them for free on my websites. There are some of them that are in books. And they talk about the subconscious selves, how to overcome them, and how to overcome illusions in general. But what the Ascended Masters have also done, they have given us a lot of practical tools for dissolving the energy that pulls us into the selves, pulls the conscious you into the selves. And you can find them on my website, transcendencetoolbox.com. And there are a number of these. There are decrees, which are rhythmic verses that you repeat, and they're all given by a specific Ascended Master. And when you give those decrees to that Master, you are evoking the assistance of the Masters who will release energy into your subconscious mind to dissolve the energy that's there, the fear-based energy that's there. And the three most powerful ones for most people to start with will be Archangel Michael, who is protecting us. Because here we are as avatars. Again, we have to realize, if you have a sense that you're an avatar, you have to realize what you're up against on this planet. And you have to realize that the fallen beings are still doing everything they can to prevent you from walking the spiritual path, and especially from reaching the higher levels of Christhood. So they are projecting energy at you, they are projecting thoughts into your mind. And I think most avatars, if you look at it, you will find that all of your life you've felt these projections of thoughts, negative thoughts about yourself and what you can and can't do. And you've also felt some lower energies. Most avatars that I met are quite sensitive to energy. We can quickly learn to sense energy in our environment. So Archangel Michael, you invoke his it's a blue energy, intense electric blue energy, and it can create a shield around you. And it's very important to do this if you haven't done it before, because it can really cut down on the noise in your mind, in your subconscious mind. You know, all of a sudden these projections, they just don't reach you, or they don't reach you with full force. And that means you now have a reprieve, because if you are under all of these projections, how much attention do you have left over for looking at your psychology and looking at the illusions? You know, you're always reacting, you're always in a stress mode. So you need a certain sense of calm, you know, where you can say, let me just take a look at this subconscious self. And that's what Archangel Michael can provide you. It isn't the same as resolving the self, but it gives you a reprieve. Then the other master that's important to consider is an Elohim called Astrea. The Elohim were the 7 beings who actually created the earth. And Astrea is on the 4th ray of purity. There are 7 spiritual rays, which I mentioned in some other videos. And she is very efficient, her energy is very efficient for cutting you free to any ties you have. And as an avatar, you know, in past lives, we have often formed ties. You can call them karmic ties, you can call them attachments. And it can be attachment to other people. They don't have to be fallen beings, but they can be fallen beings, because as avatars we've often interacted with fallen beings, which I'll talk more about in a coming video. And so we can have this energetic tie to these other people. And Astrea can come in with her very intense white energy and cut those ties, at least temporarily. Because what creates the ties, of course, we have a subconscious self, and we need to dissolve the self before we are free. But if Astrea cuts the tie temporarily, then again we get a reprieve to look at ourselves. And then, of course, the other energy that's very important is Saint Germain, and the 7th ray of freedom, which is a violet flame energy. And Saint Germain has given quite a number of decrees for invoking this violet flame energy, and it's very, very efficient. I mean, I have been giving these decrees since 1984, and it's been the single most important tool I've had on my spiritual path. Now, there is another tool that has become more important in later decades, and that's actually something called invocations. And the invocations is, a decree just invokes energy, pretty much. It invokes the energy. But an invocation has a combination of decrees and other statements, affirmations, you might say, that direct the energy into specific conditions. So if you look at the Transcendence Toolbox website, you'll find a number of these personal invocations for a variety of topics. I mean, just off the top of my head, there's one very important invocation for loving yourself. This can be very important for many people because we have, of course, been projected at us by the fallen beings not to love ourselves. There's one for clearing the heart, which is tremendous for increasing our intuition. And so, but there are many others. So there's a wide variety. I also have a lot of books that are focused on specific topics. And last time I mentioned the My Lives, but there's a follow-up series of books that are building on the My Lives, the concept of avatars. And the first one is called Healing Your Spiritual Traumas. It also has a number of invocations specifically for helping you heal the birth trauma, the cosmic birth trauma. And so if you feel this appeals to you, by all means, take a look at this. Now, the reason why it's so important to invoke the energy, as I said, is it lessens the pull on the conscious you. It's kind of like we can say, let's say that you take this idea, I'm an avatar, I have a subconscious self. Let me just look into my subconscious mind and see if I can spot the self. So the moment you direct your attention into the subconscious mind, what's the first thing that's going to hit? Most likely the emotional body. And here is it: anger, fear, doubt, all kinds of energies. And it's like walking into a hurricane. You know, once you walk into a hurricane, how much attention do you have left over to say, oh, there must be something beneath all this chaos, there must be a separate self based on a decision. You've got no chance of doing this. Your mind is just so chaotic. And normally, you know, the subconscious self suppresses that energy so you don't consciously notice it. But once you start looking at it, you're going to encounter it. So by invoking energy from the Ascended Masters, you can transform the energy so it doesn't have that chaotic effect anymore. And first of all, of course, you become much calmer. But in the long run, it actually enables you to look, because now you can see beyond the energy. You can see there is a self there. I can see I have a certain reaction. I've always had a certain way of reacting. And my reaction relates to how I look at Earth. I look at other people. I look at myself here on Earth. And there must be a decision behind it. And then you can gradually start uncovering that, and all of a sudden you can come to see it. Like I described in my last video, I always had the sense there was something I had to do on Earth. I mean, it was obsessive compulsive. I had to do something. And all of a sudden I could see that this was just an illusion. And then I had that release. There's nothing I have to do on Earth. It doesn't mean there are not things I'm doing on Earth, but I don't have to do it anymore because it's not a separate self that's driving me to do it in an unbalanced manner. Instead, I can now start fulfilling my divine plan in a much more balanced way, being at peace about it, where I don't feel I'm constantly behind or I'm not good enough or all of these things. So, again, just to round it off here, were we abandoned by God or the Ascended Masters? No. Did we abandon our spiritual teachers? No. Okay? What happened had to happen. We had to go down here. We had to immerse ourselves in the same level of consciousness that the original inhabitants of the earth are immersed in. And then from that state of immersion, without any help, we had to discover the spiritual path. But once we have discovered the spiritual path, we don't have to walk it alone. We can reconnect to the Ascended Masters and our higher selves, and this can give us an invaluable frame of reference. Because again, how are the original inhabitants of the earth going to rise above duality? They also have to connect to the Ascended Masters. How is the earth going to make the transition from being an unnatural planet to a natural planet? Only when the inhabitants begin to work with the Ascended Masters. Because that is how a natural planet functions. On a natural planet, yes, you start out at a certain level of consciousness where you just have a slight sense of connection, but as you expand your sense of connection, you become aware of what you're connected to, which is your I Am Presence and the Ascended Masters in the higher realm. And as a natural planet comes closer and closer to the ascension point, that's when a majority of the people on that planet are consciously working with the ascended masters. That's how a natural planet ascends, and that's ultimately how an entire sphere ascends, by the majority of the beings in that sphere working consciously with the ascended masters who are above that sphere, who ascended, some of them in the previous year, some of them from this sphere. So this is just how the cosmic cycles work. And you have most likely, as an avatar, you have most likely come across one or several spiritual teachings before you came across this. And it may be that some of those teachings are actually denying the existence of ascended masters or not talking about it. And they may have teachings that actually could block you from accepting ascended masters. And if that's the case, then I would say, watch some of my other videos. For example, watch my videos on non-duality, and just kind of give yourself some time to mull this over in your mind. Don't accept the idea because I say it, but don't reject it either because of your previous teachings. Give yourself a little bit of time. Because if you are an avatar, as I said, it's just a natural part of your path. At some point, you come to accept the existence of ascended masters, you see what they can do for you, what you can do for them, and you reconnect. Because if you found this video, it's part of your divine plan, your life plan, to reconnect to the ascended masters. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been attracted to this. I mean, it's just a cosmic law. You know, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So it's most likely, I'm not saying it can't happen that you could find this video, but if you found this video, watch to this point, you are an avatar, and it's part of your divine plan to reconnect to the ascended masters. And it's not about me, and it's not about what I say. It's about you using your intuition to sense what's your relationship, your personal relationship to the ascended masters. However, you can see them at this point. And then I hope you will be open, realizing that as you walk the path, your view of ascended masters will change. I mean, I look back at when I first heard about ascended masters in the 1980s, and I had a certain level of consciousness. I could grasp the masters at a certain level, but it's changed tremendously since then. And it's of course changed when I stopped having a theory, a mental image of what ascended masters are, but actually starting experiencing their presence, their beings. And that was what really did it for me. And that's also what will do it for you. You don't need me to contact the ascended masters. You know, you have to. I want to make that very clear. I don't see myself as being some go-between or intermediary between you and the ascended masters. The important thing is that you come to a point where you can work directly with the ascended masters. But of course, if I can be a help, or the teachings I brought forth can be a help, then take advantage of it. I mean, why not? And so with this, that's pretty much what I feel wants to be said in this video. But I will of course return back and talk more about the psychology of avatars, because as I've said in some of the other videos, the spiritual path is just about one thing, the resolution of psychology. There may be all kinds of teachings out there that portray it as being an outer process, and the goal is this and the goal is that, but when it all comes down to the nitty-gritty, the resolution of psychology. And there is a lot of psychology that we as avatars have taken on when we came to Earth, because by us working through it and resolving it, other people on Earth, the original inhabitants of Earth, or other avatars for that matter, can see that it can be done. So we are the forerunners, we are the pioneers who are here to start carving a trail through the jungle. And the more people follow it, the easier it becomes for others to follow it. And that's how we pull a planet up. So that instead of being the unnatural planet Earth is now, it gradually becomes a natural planet, and we can start manifesting Saint Germain's golden age.